All right, welcome everyone to this briefing. We're really excited to be having this briefing on this important topic, an interesting topic. Want to first start out just to let you know a little bit about ACT. If you're not familiar with us, ACT, the App Association, we give a voice to small technology companies. Our mission is to help members promote an environment that inspires and rewards innovation while providing resources to help them raise capital, create jobs, and continue creating incredible technology. And the app economy continues to grow and be amazing. And at this point, it accounts for about $1.7 trillion, has created 5.9 million American jobs, and serves as a key driver of the $8 trillion Internet of Things revolution. And as we always like to say at the App Association, there's an ACT member in every congressional district, which is really exciting and also a very valuable resource in case you ever need that. So today we're discussing artificial intelligence, and artificial intelligence, or AI, is changing the way we work, live, and play through augmenting and sometimes replacing processes that require human actions or decisions. While we might normally think of AI as purely business applications, it is also being used to create things that could or should be protected by copyright law. App developers and creators are utilizing AI to generate innovative new products across a broad spectrum of industries. Examples include AI-generated code, music, video, and art. And there seems to be no limit on the possibilities. The use of AI to create a work poses unique questions for intellectual property, particularly around copyright authorship, registration, and protection of the work. In this webinar, we will first get a better idea of what AI is and how it is being used by software developers and content industries to create these modern works. Then we'll explore some questions on whether and how to protect AI-generated works, the legal precedent for AI and copyright, and what the future may hold for industries creating works developed by AI and the consumers who use them. This is a timely issue for you, as policymakers are going to be asked to consider these and other policy decisions around AI-generated works. And we aren't going to solve all the issues today, but we hope that in the next hour, you're going to learn more about AI, about an AI-generated works and copyright, and that in the future, we can be used as a resource for you if you have questions or concerns. So with that, I will introduce our panelists. We have a great panel lined up today, and I'm excited to hear what they have to teach us about this topic. First, we have Ian Slotin, who is the Senior Vice President of Intellectual Property at NBCUniversal. Ian leads the Innovation, Technology, and Policy team in NBCUniversal's Intellectual Property Legal Group. His team supports the company's R&D and emerging technology initiatives, including artificial intelligence, virtual augmented reality, and cloud production. He also works with the government affairs teams to formulate the company's global policy strategy on copyright, right of publicity, and other IP-related legislation, and advises business leaders on the legal, business, and policy ramifications of disruptive technologies, particularly on issues at the intersection of technology and copyright. Next, we have Marc Fischer, who is the CEO and co-founder of Dogtown Media. Marc is a front-end developer and UX UI designer with over a decade of experience launching custom software for web and mobile. He's also a professor with the Graphic Arts Department at Santa Monica College, teaching mobile app design to computer science and graphic design students. Marc likes to say his favorite place is the intersection of creative design and flawless code. And finally, we have Sandra Asters, is a clinical professor, senior scholar, and senior fellow for the Center for Copyright Research and Policy at Center for Intellectual Property, Innovation Policy at George Mason University School of Law. She also leads the law school's Arts and Entertainment Advocacy Program. Professor Asters has over 20 years of advocacy experience on behalf of copyright and other intellectual property owners. Immediately prior to joining Scalia Law, Professor Asters was the Chief Executive Officer for the Copyright Alliance, a nonprofit public interest organization that represents the interests of artists and creators across the creative spectrum. So with that, I will turn it over. First, I will, Ian, if you would like to lead it off with a little bit of intro about yourself and about NBCUniversal and what you do, and then we'll follow along after that for each panelist, and then we will begin our Q&A.
Sure, sounds good. And thank you so much to you and to ACT for giving me the opportunity to speak today. It was a really interesting topic. So at NBCUniversal, as many of you probably know, we create and distribute TV, film, news, sports, and other video content. And we also create and exploit like ancillary items like merchandise, video games, theme park rides, all based on our content. So what I thought I'd do it to start things off is just spend a few minutes speaking about some AI use cases that we're seeing for content creation. And in the main, what we're finding is that AI enables us to meet growing demands for content across different devices and platforms, and to make our content better. The technologies benefit creatives by freeing them from mundane and tedious tasks and solving logistical and production problems that would otherwise require greater investment in time. So the first example is an example of creating new products from an existing animated product. So the typical process for creating a finished piece of animated content, like an animated movie or TV show, it's actually a multi-step workflow that takes time, expertise, and effort every time you do it. Once you have a final version of a film or TV episode, in order to reuse an asset, and by an asset I mean like a character or a prop or 3D rendering of those things, to create something else like an augmented or virtual reality experience, maybe an NFT or a gaming asset or a social media or theme park use, you have to run through that same process again. And that could take weeks of effort just to reuse a character. But there are AI tools available today that you can employ to reuse those assets, and it could reduce the amount of time needed from weeks to maybe days or even hours, depending on the application. And also, of course, reduces the expenses of doing that dramatically. And so this opens up a variety of new possibilities for the types of content that it now makes economic sense to create, where it wasn't possible before. An example of this is something we launched recently on Cameo.com, featuring one of our animated characters. Cameo, as many of you may know, is a service for which a celebrity will record a personalized video greeting for you. And the attraction of that service is, of course, that the messages are personalized with details about the recipient. So what we did is we did the same thing with the DreamWorks animation Boss Baby character. So you can sign up on the website and get a custom greeting just as you would from a celebrity. And to do that, we use an AI system to generate custom video and audio in response to each order. This just would not be possible using conventional methods because the conventional animation pipeline is just too lengthy and expensive to justify creating a custom piece of content like this at the price point that would make sense. So this is an example of where AI is augmenting the volume and types of content and products we can provide. And it's not replacing the work that would otherwise be done by a human, because this is not a product we would have been able to provide otherwise. And so as I mentioned, it's a great way to show how AI creates whole new categories of entertainment that were not available before. The second example I wanted to mention was the uses of AI to analyze content and figure out what's in it. AI is very, very good at scanning large troves of content and telling you, tagging it with what we call metadata or information about that content. And this would allow us to match content better with similar content, maybe generate better recommendations for people. In a news and sports context, it allows you to take a database of a ton of footage and surface content that's relevant that you can reuse, for folks. One interesting use case in the content analysis category is the ability to use AI to analyze scripts for potential unconscious bias. So back in 2020, we announced a pilot project with the Gina Davis Institute on Gender and Media at Mount St. Mary's University and the University of Southern California to work with those universities' spell check for bias tool. That tool analyzes scripts to match up representations of characters by gender, race, sexuality, disability, age, and body type with depictions of violence, the amounts and type of dialogue that those characters have, and the character's depicted intelligence. And the system's outputs can be used to identify opportunities to increase representation of underrepresented groups and surface instances of unintended bias in character portrayals at the script stage. The initial phase of the project was quite successful, and we have expanded it as of last October to include looking at Latinx representation, as well as Asian American Pacific Islander representation and Black representation. So this is an example where AI is being used to supplement the work our creative collaborators do and make it better. The system doesn't generate plot lines, dialogue, or characters. It simply identifies irregularities and opportunities for improvement that creatives can then discuss among themselves and figure out whether they make sense or not. The third and final one I wanted to mention is a dubbing use case. And dubbing is interesting because it's an application of an AI technology that can make one person's voice sound like another. So in a dubbing context, right, you could make a character's voices in the Spanish language dub of a US production sound just like the actors who performed in the original film. So you still need to hire a dubbing performer who speaks Spanish to speak the lines, but then the final product is improved by giving the Spanish-speaking audience something closer to the experience that those who are watching the English language version would have. So this highlights an important point about some of these technologies, right? So it's certainly clear that there can be inappropriate uses of technologies like this. Voice simulation certainly gives rise to issues if it's done without consent and in a way that is intended to deceive people into thinking they said something they never said. But given how this can be applied in appropriate ways too, it probably makes the most sense to focus on avoiding the harmful conduct you're actually trying to get at. In this case, in that example, deception or fraud or misleading people. And rather than assuming that the technology itself is a problem across the board. So those were just 3 examples that I had to give, and happy to answer questions and discuss further.
Thank you, Ian. And we'll turn over to Marc at this point.
Thanks so much, everybody, for being here today. My name is Marc Fischer. I am the co-founder and CEO of Dogtown Media. We are a mobile technology studio that accelerates innovation for VC-backed startups and big companies that want to think and act like a startup and bring new business models to the market. We deal mainly with the industries of the future, such as AI and ML, Internet of Things and wearable devices, as well as health technologies. I've been an ACT App Association member for the past 7 years. I'm also a guest contributor to Forbes, Entrepreneur.com, and Inc. magazine, where I write on science and technology and future industries that involve software and smart product design, both in business as well as our personal lives. And a lot of what we do nowadays incorporates machine learning and AI. Some of the neat things that we work on are more or less in the R&D phase, where somebody, one of our partners, comes to us with a problem set, and then we figure out through product strategy and technical architecture how to build it and create a proof of concept to prove or disprove our assumptions, and then move on to commercialization. So some of the coolest projects, unfortunately, I'm not able to talk about publicly other than giving some context for what they're about. Predictive medicine, robots and industrial drones, situational awareness for computer vision systems and chatbots are some of the really neat sci-fi areas that we've had the privilege of diving into. So I'll start with predictive medicine. We build custom wearable devices, as well as using off-the-shelf wearable devices to predict your health in the, what your health is going to be like in the future, oftentimes before you even know there's a medical problem with you, or a doctor would even know if there's an issue with you. By monitoring massive amounts of data that your body gives off, we're able to create machine learning models and predictive models and AI models, AI algorithms that can then turn around and make inferences and therapeutics that are able to help you change your behavior or help your doctor get the information they need to make an informed decision about your health, oftentimes before you even know there's a problem. This is especially important for diseases such as neurological problems or cardiovascular issues. Diseases that are progressive oftentimes don't show you the ills that you're going to be facing years from now, or the areas that you can improve your health through situational awareness. Another example is diabetes care. We've worked with a few leading diabetes monitoring medical device companies to monitor your diabetes and to give you turn-by-turn directions on how you can change your day-to-day behavior in the moment in real time, such as avoiding sugary foods, or eating large meals versus spreading out your meals into snacks over the course of your average day, and incorporating this a lot into our mobile apps that we're able to deploy out into the consumer space to improve health outcomes. Another really neat area that we've explored is in the industrial drone space. We built a drone that's able to fly overhead and take pictures of the ground below it. And this is for the precision farming area. As we know, the cost of food is going up exponentially, and it's very important to realize how food insecure we are as a nation right now in a globalized world where war and supply chain bottlenecks are causing food prices to go up at double, triple, and quadruple the price of baseline inflation, and how farmers can use precision drone technology to improve food yields and use AI to analyze their crops and make more informed decisions, such as parts of the field that may need more or less fertilizer or more or less insecticide, or areas of the field that need more or less water, and simple things that farmers can do, such as optimizing when their harvest period will take place, and getting the maximum amount of yield out of every acre of their farm. Another neat area that we've dived into is situational awareness using computer vision. So computer vision is basically taking in the field around you in an image format or video format and understanding everything that's taking place in real time. Being able to identify objects such as a television, a moving vehicle, what direction a vehicle is moving in, how fast it's moving in that direction, and whether or not it's going to be anticipated for it to be turning right or left, and understanding things like traffic controls and making sure that our cities are operating smart and efficiently so that people get where they're going as fast as possible. And also identifying other smart industrial products or hardware systems by using IoT, so that multiple independently operating machinery or things such as automobiles are able to predict where each one of them are going and make the chances of an accident almost the risk of an accident happening go down to almost zero. One last area that we're really excited in operating is in the chatbot space. So we all know Alexa as a home model on how we can have real dialogue and operations take place with a chatbot through voice commands, but also taking that technology to the next level and mimicking customer service reps, giving patients such as elderly folks that are living on their own a virtual caregiver or virtual doctor visit through an Alexa chatbot. Much more interesting stuff that we're working on, and really excited about the future and learning more about what everybody's interested about. Thank you all.
Thank you, Marc. Now we'll turn it over to Sandra.
Thanks, Debbie. So thank you very much for inviting me to participate and for putting on this event. I think you're starting at the point where we need to start, really. And that's where I'd like to focus my remarks. And maybe not surprisingly, since I'm out of law school and I focus on education all day long. And I take some comfort in the fact that when we first started talking about the internet and IP and the internet many years ago, when I was a baby lawyer, there was this idea that copyright shouldn't apply online, and frankly, no laws should apply online. Right? We should have a different system altogether on the internet. And I don't really hear the same thing being said about AI. I think people are really struggling. And maybe struggling is the wrong word. Maybe the better word would be exploring how to fit what we know about AI and how that technology is developing either into the existing IP laws that we have, or how to adapt those laws to fit with how the technology is developing, or whether we need to actually develop a new body of laws that are specifically tailored to deal with the needs of AI technology. So I take some comfort from that people are starting from the right place and from the right attitude towards AI and towards intellectual property, generally speaking. And I see that happening around the world, not just in the United States. So I'd like to emphasize education, if I could, in terms of both what I'm working on personally and what I think we need to work on collectively. And so just a few words about what I'm working on personally. And when I say personally, I'm referring really to here at George Mason University and the law school, and in particular, the Center for Intellectual Property by Innovation Policy. And we've done a number of events in the past year or two focusing on AI. We did an entire conference about a year ago focusing on AI, which you can go and review if you're interested. And I think that is a very good way to start setting the groundwork for these sorts of discussions. I think we need to have a common understanding of what AI is, and to be very specific about the ways that AI functions, the sort of use scenarios that we're talking about, and the kinds of concerns that might come out of those use scenarios. Because when we talk about the laws that might apply or could apply, one person might be talking about text and data mining, and another person might be talking about, machine learning, and still a third person can be talking about something, completely different. And so until we have a level setting that puts us all in the same place, I think we have a hard time getting to where we need to be. I think some of the use scenarios that Ian talked about and some of the use scenarios that Marc talked about are very interesting to get into. And I think the way to look at these things is both looking at what are the inputs into how we train the systems and what are the outputs. And I would encourage us to think about the data that goes into training an AI system. And a lot of that data often happens to be copyrighted works. And so one might have a very strong view that the works training an AI, if they're copyrighted works, should be deserving of the same sort of protection they're deserving of in any other licensed use case scenario. But you might have a different view as to what happens on the output end. Should there be different rules? Should it be unprotected? Should it be equally protected? Should it be open to debate? And I think we're sort of in that grappling for answers state right now. And we need to determine the tests to apply when AIs generate works. And I think if you look at what's been happening recently at the Copyright Office, for instance, and the title of this panel is very apt. My AI wrote this work. Can I register it? Can I protect it? And I think not just our Copyright Office, but Copyright Offices all around the world are kind of grappling this. What do we do with that work once it's produced? Can it be protected? And I'll just to kind of tee up the issue in one other way, not just inputs and outputs, but also there is an important difference that I think we need to keep in mind between protection and infringement. because those are also two different analyses that we're making under the copyright law. Something can be unprotected but still infringe another work. I'll stop there, and I think get back into the discussion when we talk about specific topics.
Thank you, Sandra. Yes, and we will definitely touch back on some of those points that you've raised. So thank you very much. So we will start with just some questions for our panel, and for the audience, we will have an opportunity to ask to enter questions into the webinar program, and we will leave 10 minutes at the end to answer those. So if you at any point just put those in, and we will have time at the end to address them. And if we don't get to all of them, we will do what we can to make sure that we connect you with the answers and the panelists if they'd like to follow up and provide answers to you. So first of all, so Ian, when you were talking, I think a lot of us think that AI is something that takes away so much of the human involvement in the creation of a content, that there's and there is some of that, but yet tell me more about how much human involvement is still a part of any process involving AI and creating creative work at the end.
Sure. Yeah. And I think I should just make sure that I'm, being clear that I'm talking about film and TV content and professional film and TV content. And so the answers may be very different for music or images and things like that. But for at least for the kind of content that we create and that consumers expect to come from a company like ours, the human involvement is very, very, very high level. There's not a scenario right now where we have to worry so much about whether an AI is the author or not. I mean, the AI is really a tool being used by a person to make things easier, right? Once the human has designed what the character will look like, maybe the AI can help you animate the character to move around in certain ways, right? More easily than it would have been before. But yeah, so that's what we're really seeing right now is that these are being used to improve production processes, start to clear away some of the more mundane tasks that, probably there were there were definitely humans doing before, but in the way the technology eliminates some mundane tasks and allows people to focus on the more creative stuff, right? The more creative decisions, the way the shot's going to be framed, the lighting, the humor, the dialogue, all that kind of stuff. So that's, I think, what I would say about that.
Thank you. And for Marc, you listed so many amazing ways that AI is being used across all sorts of different industries. But to connect to what Sandra said about an output, it seems as though that the point of the uses of AI that you mentioned were less about a product like in Ian's industry, but more about how it can inform decision making in all of these industries. So the main point of the AI is perhaps slightly different than what the TV and film studio would be using an AI for.
Sure. So I guess the easiest way of explaining where AI can really make an impact would be in predictive analytics. And this can be built into just about any mainstream industry that you can think of, but I'll give health and finance as two of them that are really adaptive with AI technologies. The first being financial technology, fintech. When you make a charge on your credit card, Amex, Visa, MasterCard are using massive amounts of data and AI algorithms and machine learning models to identify whether or not there is a fraud taking place, and whether or not the charge is happening in a context that will raise a red flag and cause the fraud detection to deny that charge, to flag it and ask you if you want to put it through, or to let that charge go through as normal. And then I give you a notification later on. That all takes place in a fraction of a second. And at the end of the day, the financial industry gains, consumer protections are gained, insurers gain and are able to lower risk premiums, and transactions between a buyer and a seller in our industry all gain. So it's a net win in those cases. In healthcare, predictive analytics using either off-the-shelf wearables like a Apple smartwatch, an Apple Watch that you would put on your wrist, are able to give you an opportunity to kind of level the playing field and create human longevity like we've never had before. Human longevity being increased lifespans for the average person who's wearing one of these wearable devices and getting up-to-date information on what their health is looking like, and reactive notifications to tell you if your heart rate is spiking and you need to go talk to a doctor or sit down to lower your rate, because there's an EKG notification that says that you're at risk of having a heart attack or stroke in that very moment. And then also sharing that immense amount of health data with the right tidbits of information for your doctor, your caregiver, or your nurse to examine and to give you very fast feedback on what the medical condition is that you may be suffering from, and what type of actions can be taken immediately on that information in order to save your life or to improve your quality of life now into the future.
It's pretty exciting what's happening and what's on the horizon on those fronts. And Sandra, so in the recent Paradise Lost decision at the Copyright Office, it seemed that the registration was for that work was rejected, and it seemed to hinge on that human intervention element. And I was wondering if you could just talk more about that aspect, or just tell us more about that that Copyright Office ruling and what it was about.
Sure. And I don't know whether it's helpful to just kind of take a step like way back and way high level, and without talking about any particular use scenarios, just say at least what I think of when I think about what is an AI, what's machine learning, and what's kind of like narrow versus general AI, at least so that
Sure. Yes.
that may be clear, because I think that might help people understand also kind of the difference between the use scenarios that Ian was talking about and the use scenarios that were at issue in this opinion by the Copyright Office. So generally, I think when I talk about AI, and I think when a lot of people talk about AI, people are thinking about technology that mimics human thought and allows machines to perform tasks on their own that are similar to those that require human intelligence, such as perceiving something or building on experiences or acquired knowledge or interacting with humans in some fashion. So you could imagine, stuff like what Siri does, or what customer service chatbots do, or recommendation engines, or automated driving cars. Those are all kind of narrowly trained tasks that you could teach an AI to do. Some more general AI tasks. General AI is kind of what we refer to as like the future of AI, where you might have like a theoretical AI that would have the intelligence of a human that would be more self-aware and forward thinking. But I don't think that we have that yet, right? We're thinking more about training AIs to particular tasks. And machine learning and deep learning are terms that you sometimes hear, and that's what those are like subfields of AI, right? And that's how an AI learns. So with machine learning and deep learning, you're not requiring human intervention, but you're allowing the machine to sort of teach itself from the data sets that you've fed into it, and to allow it to figure out how to organize those data sets to accomplish a goal, from investigating it and organizing it, right? So those are some of the concepts that we're thinking about. The issue that was at issue in this recent case at the Copyright Office was both a real creative attempt, actually, to create something and get it registered as an actual creative work, but also it was an attempt to sort of set the boundaries of what is protectable and what's not protectable as a legal matter. And so the work was a recent entrance to Paradise, and it was submitted for copyright registration and denied registration, as you point out. And the author of the work was identified in the registration by the person who submitted it as well. The claimant was Dr. Taylor, and he was the claimant as a result of a transfer, but the author of the work was the creativity machine, the AI. And Taylor was the claimant as a result of a transfer from the creativity machine, resulting from ownership of the machine. And Taylor said that that the work had been autonomously created by the computer algorithm running on a machine, and he was seeking to register the computer-generated work as a work made for hire, since he was the owner of the machine. And the Copyright Office refused to register this work because it lacked the human authorship necessary to support a copyright claim. And there was a back and forth. It was refused registration, and then it was appealed through all the appropriate steps that you have to go through before the Copyright Office. And ultimately now the person who's the claimant is going to sue in federal court to seek a ruling as to whether the Copyright Office is right or not. But this is a very different scenario than what Ian is talking about, right? Because Ian is talking about a situation where an AI is being used as a tool. And this was an attempt to establish an AI as being used as the actual independent creator. And there's a long list of cases, the most recent of which we're all, happy to joke about, the monkey selfie case, saying that you have to be a human to create, and AIs aren't humans. And so that was among the cases that the Copyright Office cited. But the whole idea is that you need like some human origin, some human spark of creativity, and if you don't have that human spark of creativity, you don't meet even the low bar, the low threshold that the copyright law sets for originality under the copyright laws.
Well, thank you. That is helpful. And yes, I entrance to Paradise, and I put in Paradise Lost, and that was in reference to a recent webinar that you put on the topic. So that also is an interesting place for people to go in the event they want to learn more about that case and that issue. So thank you. The distinction you made about it being machine, the machine learning and the inputs and, difference in the outputs. I want to follow up on that point with Marc. Just the importance of, the algorithm is an important part of an AI, process, but how important is that data input and the training of the machine of the algorithm to the learning portion, and what kind of industry or is developing around that in your area, and then the initiatives that you're working on to create to have effective products at the end.
That's a great question. Also kind of broad because there's so many different use cases for AI, and everything is powered by machine learning in the AI world. So some of the really important things to understand is like answering this initial problem is what's the problem that I'm trying to solve and what is it that I'm trying to build, and then starting to work backwards from there and to discover what the foundation is that you need to be putting in place, which is data, and clean data at that. So when we're building out a machine learning model, we first start with the building blocks and try to get the data as clean as possible. So that data may be images, video, maps, sound, text, or contextual type of models or actions that could be taken if it's a gaming engine, for instance. And then we want to collect as much of those data points as possible, and create our machine learning algorithm, our machine learning algorithms around that. So a good example is our situational awareness algorithm that we created, and the computer vision demo app that we built out to understand what's in your frame of reference. When you pan out with your camera, being able to identify things in the real world immediately was our goal. And what we had to do was create a product catalog. And this product catalog was made up of 1,000 different consumer items that are most commonly sold on Amazon. And we collected hundreds of images of each one of those consumer items and fed it into our machine learning model, basically a database of pictures that represented each one of these products. And then started building out and training the machine learning algorithm by manually telling the computer whether or not it got its guess right, and improving the ML model to get up to 99% accuracy after the course of a 3-month manual training period. It was very hands-on, very intense, but once we got over the hump and were able to create this initial model, we were able to replicate that for another 1,000 consumer products shortly thereafter. So your AI algorithm is only as good as the data that's being fed into it, is the most important takeaway here.
And can I jump in there and say one thing? So, and I agree with you that it's really important to have good data, clean data, and also like unbiased data for a lot of things that we're talking about. And so having systems in place that encourage people to improve their data, so that they're not just taking and like whatever, sweeping stuff into their data sets that is publicly available on the internet, or maybe not publicly available, but available on the internet, protected by copyright or not, and just sweeping it into their data sets and not distinguishing and not improving. I tend to lean, if I have to disclose my priors, towards having sui generis protection for AI, because I think if we think about the policies that we want to encourage and the actions that we want to encourage, both on the inputs and on the outputs, of like the good behaviors that Ian was referring to and that Marc's referring to by companies and by users of the tools, I think it's not like what the IP laws have to say alone. It's a lot of other things. It's privacy. It's like not having bias. It's, making sure that we're promoting all the things that the Gina Davis example that you mentioned, gives us in terms of the data that we're using. So I think there's a lot of kind of social policy that we want to look at beyond just IP too.
Well, that's a great segue to this next question. I'm gonna see in our time. And I think you kind of set it up well that, you know, what do we need? And this could be for Ian, Marc, Sandra. Is copyright protection for AI works? Is this, you know, is it necessary to encourage the investment in the technologies in these, and the, you know, the continued investment in AI as we go forward in the, you know, the mobile app industry, in the television and film industry? How important is that at this point in the investment and the, you know, continued growth of this technology?
So I'll go first. I think for film and TV, I don't think that whether or not an AI, you know, output of the kind that Sandra was discussing, you know, with the recent Entrance to Paradise example, is going to be meaningful in terms of determining whether or not we invest in the kinds of applications I mentioned, right? Because those applications, you know, the custom Boss Baby video, you know, whatever, all the, you know, or better visual effects, you know, all those things are valuable in themselves, and there's clearly a human who is making the creative decisions. So that policy question that's on the difficult one that Sandra mentioned is just not yet an issue for us. And if you really think about it, right, if you think about kind of the sorts of works that folks want to watch when they want to watch a long form piece of content, we are a very long way off from a situation where an AI has, you know, come up with a script, come up with a character, come up with, you know, something that people are interested in, come up with, you know, the way the humor would work, the timing, like all, you know, everything. So it's really not a question that is that close for us yet. That doesn't mean that we don't favor it. I just think we haven't reached that point yet. I would want to mention, though, I think that the issue of infringement and what the outputs look like, you know, is an important one, right? You know, I think there's a question in the Q&A about like, how can an AI infringe? And I think that the discussion about how an AI works, you know, answers that, right? Because the AI essentially replicates what it's been trained on, right? So if it's been trained on a bunch of copyrighted content or videos of Woody Woodpecker, it'll probably create something that looks a lot like Woody Woodpecker. And then, you know, I think what we would want to be certain about is that just because an AI created it doesn't mean that it has some special status that it's not infringing. You know, that's not appropriate in the same way that if a human decided to reproduce something, we think that both of those things should be, you know, copyright should be enforced in both those situations.
Great, thank you. So we do have, and thank you for answering one of the questions in the Q&A. That was great. I like that. One of the others is to Sandra, and I'm not sure if you have an answer for this, but I will pass it along here. What are some of the notable policy highlights for AI under the new administration?
What are some of the notable policy highlights for AI? I think we've been talking about them generally. I mean, the question is whether we need to think about, you know, protecting AI as a separate kind of species of you know, technology law, property law, what have you. And if so, what does that look like? I think we, you know, need to be thinking about how we protect humans in that mix and ensure that human authors and creators are still incentivized to be creating and producing works separate and apart from AIs. I think we also want to be ensuring that that folks who are using AIs as tools in their work, which is really where we are at this point in time for the most part, are incentivized and empowered to continue to use those works in their creation, or those tools in their creation of their works. Because I think that's the really exciting thing that's happening now, is how authors and I use authors in the Copyright Act sense of the word, meaning all types of artists in all types of media are using AIs. And then, and I certainly don't want to neglect all of the other uses for AI that Marc was talking about, which are so important in terms of enabling our health and well-being in other spheres. And he certainly talked about all of the ways that having a well-protected, well-enabled AI kind of ecosystem is important to us in that respect. So I guess that's why I'm saying we need to be educated on the front end as to what does AI encompass, and what are we talking about in terms of use scenarios now and in the future to be able to do that well.
That's great, thank you. And I think as we wrap up here, there's always a general concern or just this conversation around AI that there's this fear that AI is going to replace jobs, that there's going to be so many less jobs because it's going to take over what humans do. But is that really the case? For anyone who would like to answer this, do you see that happening? Do you see this, or is it that there might be just a transformation in what kinds of jobs we're doing in the future, and new industries opening up, or new ways of doing things, but that there isn't necessarily going to be this replacement of machines replacing humans?
I can talk into this one. I think that it's really important to understand where we're at and where we're kind of going as a nation and as like a global marketplace. So the AI economy is going to be worth almost $16 trillion by 2030, and contribute to about 14% of global growth over the next 8 years as well. So those are pretty big numbers that McKinsey has put out. And just examining where we're at right now, AI has never been more important than it is. We have an unemployment rate that keeps going down. It's at a record low of 3.8% and diving lower. We have an upside down job market where there's 5 million more open jobs than there are unemployed people. America's logistics system is broken. 72% of American freight is delivered by trucks, and we have a shortage of 80,000 truck drivers and growing. And these anecdotes that I have just keep on rolling over into each and every single industry that we can think of. And the solution to these problems of not having enough workers is really to create AI in the form of smart algorithms that can solve problems and do people's jobs, or at least help people be more efficient at doing their jobs, so fewer people are required and more productivity is gained, or to have robots that can do a lot of the jobs that people just don't want to do anymore, or aren't around to do. So whether it's manufacturing or smart manufacturing or truck driving, or customer support or caregiving, we need AI, and we need more robots, and we need more innovation in order to solve the structural issues that our economy and other economies across the globe are coming up against. And honestly, if we don't do it, the Chinese innovation market will do it for us and dominate the next few decades. So definitely encourage our administration to fund way more, to commit way more in the way of funding and support for innovators here in this country now.
I like the pitch. That's great. And I'm sure the audience appreciates hearing that too. Ian, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would just repeat some of the things I already mentioned, which at least for us, we're really not seeing, AI taking away jobs. I mean, there's sort of a joke that, like, whenever you get a new, visual effects, capability or tool, like there's a possibility that you could spend less money on production, but you never do. You just like add more bells and whistles to like whatever the production is, right? So, and I think that's what we're seeing with AI in the creative space, is that it's just allowing us to make more content. It's allowing us, we're making, make it look better, make it look more realistic, make people feel more transported to whatever the story or the world is that we're trying to create. So yeah, so a little bit of a different answer, in the sense that we're just not seeing that kind of drop off in machines taking over people's jobs in our industry.
Well, great. I really appreciate everyone's input, and I think that this is a perfect time to, if anyone has any final words that they'd like to add to this, anything that you want to, convey to our audience. Really appreciate everyone for taking time out of your day to come and join us. We had great participation and great number of participants today. I would, if anybody has anything else you'd like to say to before we wrap up, leaving it open. No? All right, well, we're stopping at 1:58, and hope everyone has a wonderful day. Thank you very much for coming to the webinar, and if you have any follow-up questions, feel free to email us at or contact us at ACT, and we'll make sure that we get you answers or resources or links to anybody, the webinars that our panelists have done, and make sure you have the answers.
Thanks,
All right.
everybody.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone.